Welcome to the recorded lectures for Biology 250. This is Chapter 3, Topic 3.1. I'll be breaking the chapters up into topics. This makes the recorded lectures much more manageable as far as finding time to watch them without writing down what time marker you are on currently. Also, this keeps the length within what the brain, on average, can focus on. Keeps it fresh, you know. At the start of every recorded topic lecture, I'll be going over what the learning objectives for this topic are. For example, the objectives for this topic are: be able to discuss the processes of life and how they differentiate living organisms from non-living things, be able to discuss the arguments for and against viruses being classified as living, be able to list and describe the structures found in every cell and how they help cells survive and adapt to their environments, be able to list and discuss the differences between eukaryotic and prokaryotic cells, be able to discuss the pros and cons of the differences between eukaryotic and prokaryotic cells. In the exam information folder on Blackboard, I'll have a study guide which has all of the learning objectives for the chapters that will be covered on the exam. Next, I'll have an overview of either the chapter or the topic. For example, in this chapter overview, because it is the first topic, I cover the topics for the chapter, which are the processes of life, what is a cell exactly, eukaryotic versus prokaryotic cells, prokaryotic cell structure, and eukaryotic cell structure. For this particular topic, I'll be covering the first three items: the processes of life, what is a cell, and the differences between eukaryotic and prokaryotic cells. In Topic 3.2, we will cover external prokaryotic cell structure, and in Topic 3.3, we will cover internal prokaryotic structure, and in Topic 3.4, we'll cover eukaryotic structure. Before I move on to the next slide, I'd like to talk about the overall setup of the course. Since B201 is a prereq for this course, you will have covered all of these topics. Well, in 201 we spend more time on eukaryotic cells, but still, this will all seem like a review. It is. Because you've covered the material before, you should relearn it fairly quickly. At least I did, in my undergraduate days. Because you have a foundation in these topics, we can go into more detail on these topics and discuss the why of things. For example, is it a benefit to have a nucleus? Because our cells contain nuclei, it's tempting to say yes right off. But is it really? What are the benefits? What could be some hazards? And finally, because this is general microbiology, we'll be spending more time on prokaryotes than we did in 201. So let us start on the first topic in this chapter, the processes of life. Life and living are obvious, aren't they? In this picture, the cute baby elephant is standing in the shelter of her mother's legs. And it's obvious that she and her mother are alive, and the cable of the enclosure and the dirt in the paddock are not. I mean, they move around and the cable and the dirt don't. But the cable and the dirt do move around. Eventually, the cable will disintegrate and fall off. The dirt is blown around. The dirt of mudslides move on their own to disastrous effects sometimes. So we can't really use movement as a definition of life. Besides, plants don't gallop around fields, so they could be excluded, and they are clearly alive. I could go on, but I'll switch to what the book talks about. Early scientists and philosophers had this same problem: how to define life. Scientists eventually settled on living things are composed of organic molecules, such as amino acids and carbohydrates. If we found organic molecules in the environment outside of living things, either they came from living things, either by being excreted or exhaled, or from dead organisms. Organic molecules had a life force to them. Then some bozo synthesized organic molecules in the lab from inorganic molecules and upset the whole thing. The nerve of some people. Now we had to come up with a new definition. Today we say that all living things must have the following characteristics: They can grow or increase in size. Confusingly, we also use this term to refer to an increase in population, especially when talking about microbes. But in the strictest sense, it refers to an increase in size. The baby elephant will increase in size until she's as big as her mother, if all goes well. The cable will only get smaller from erosion and such. Living things can reproduce or make more of themselves. This can be either by sexual reproduction, like the baby elephant was produced by the union of sperm from her father and an egg from her mother, or by asexual reproduction. For the baby elephant to grow to the size of her mother, the cells in her body will need to reproduce asexually, or by division. More about that in later chapters as well. All living things respond to their environment. I'll expand that to internal and external environment. For example, the baby elephant responds to an empty stomach by eating. Of course, there is a lot of communication going on between the stomach, brain, and other organs to achieve this, which could be thought of as responding to signals external to the cells in the elephant. The baby also responds to external signals, so to speak, such as the touch of her mother, the people at the zoo taking pictures, and so on. All living things have a metabolism, which is the combination of anabolic and catabolic pathways that allow the baby to extract energy and nutrient from the mother's milk and turn it into more baby elephant. And lastly, this textbook ends with cellular structure. All living things must be composed of at least one cell. In B201, the text threw in two other characteristics, development and adaptation, but we won't quibble about differences in textbooks now, will we? These 5 are what you will need to know for the exams. So let's apply our characteristics to other examples, shall we? Plants, as represented by these lovely irises, have all the characteristics of life. They grow, they reproduce, they have a metabolism, otherwise they wouldn't be able to grow and reproduce. Besides, all of the carbohydrates that we eat originally came from plants and their cousins, algae, by photosynthesizing. And they have little plant cells that make up the visible plant. Well, what about bacteria? They are composed of just one cell, but that gets them into the club. They metabolize, which is fine when they are making bread or cheese for us, but annoying when they spoil my food. They reproduce, only asexually, but that still gets you into the life club. And they increase in size, basically doubling before they divide into 2 cells. Now we get into what I call the borderland. Those things that have some, but not all, of the characteristics of life. I present the viruses. They reproduce, unfortunately. You can probably tell I'm suffering from a cold, which is caused by a virus, the little monsters. They are reproducing in my sinuses, and they spread to new hosts every time I sneeze or touch an elevator button with my unwashed hands. They respond to their environment. They have taken over some of my cells to reproduce themselves. Some viruses can clip themselves off of a host cell once they see the occupied sign, which means the cell is already infected. They have a metabolism of sorts, although here is where it starts to get tricky. They mostly use the cell machinery of the cell they have taken over, but they bring their own genetic material, and in some viruses, their own unique enzymes. Some viruses even metabolize outside of the host cell, although most don't. Also, viruses don't grow. They assemble, but they don't get any bigger. And critically, they don't have all the necessary parts to be a cell. So, are they alive or aren't they? We'll be debating this one in class. So, let's talk about what makes a cell, which is a whole lot easier than defining what's life. Cells are living entities surrounded by a membrane that are capable of all the characteristics of life. They can be single-celled, like these lovely myxobacteria, or they can be multicellular, like the phlox, those are the flowers, and the moth in this picture. So, to be capable of all the characteristics of life, a cell must have 1. A membrane that defines its inside from its outside, 2. Genetic information, and 3. Enzymes necessary for metabolism. One of the learning objectives for this topic is to know the difference between eukaryotic and prokaryotic cells. Instead of going over this part, I want you to jot down what you remember from Biology 201. Then as you read through the chapter in the textbook, or watch the other videos for this chapter, fill in some more differences. I warn you, I may ask you to do a compare and contrast on the exam, so it's good to practice now. So that's it for this lecture. I have some tables from the textbook that summarize some of the information very nicely. I also have a reminder of what I expect you to get out of this part of the chapter. So I'll let you read those on your own, and we'll meet back for topic 3.2.